Morning. Welcome to the first day of FMF. We're excited to come together again in this tradition as a family medicine community. Thank you for joining us today in beautiful Montreal. The island of Montreal is also called Teotihuaca, with the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation recognized as the original caretakers of the land and waters. Montreal is the gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, of which the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is a part, as well as the Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg peoples. I'm grateful to be a guest on this land. I come to you from Hamilton, Ontario, which is situated in the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, covered by the dish with the One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. While having a reputation as a gritty steel town, it's not hard to catch green glimpses of natural beauty threaded throughout the city thanks to the Niagara Escarpment. Similarly, Montreal is a bustling city with nature never very far away. Beautiful boardwalks taking you through forests and meadows and along waterways. Montrealers appreciate their green spaces, and we are reminded of the healing connection we have with this land. And so collectively, we offer thanks to the Indigenous stewards of the land, both past and present. My name is Dr. Nancy Fowler, and I'm the Deputy CEO for the CFPC and the Foundation for Advancing Family Medicine. Thanks for joining us today at FMF. 4 days of events, continuing professional development session, and opportunities to network. It's also time for us to continue the conversations that we began at the annual meeting of members on November the 1st. Member engagement was unprecedented at this AMM. This engagement is important and valued and has caused us to reflect on how the CFPC communicates and works with members, our chapters, and our partners. We took too long to respond to your concerns, and the tone of our previous communications was unproductive. We accept responsibility for this, and we apologize. We heard your frustrations and respect the results of the vote. The CFPC has ceased the implementation of the third year of family medicine residency training and will undertake a comprehensive review of this decision guided by the member motion put forward at the AMM. We'll do a full review of the organization, expected to begin early in 2024, which will include consideration of ways to meaningfully address the remaining member motions on transparency. We look forward to connecting with you more in the coming year. We're in this together. While there is no doubt a crisis in family medicine, there's reason to be hopeful. The CFPC is demanding that elected leaders take urgent action and make bold investments into our healthcare system now. The exceptional care that we provide is appreciated. I know the weight of it, the stress of it, and I want to thank you for carrying it, especially in such trying times. This year's FMF is an opportunity for us to amplify our messages even as we come together to learn, connect, celebrate our successes and accomplishments. On behalf of the CFPC volunteers and staff, we'd like to wish you a wonderful FMF experience. It's so great to be together. Merci.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. I am Dr. Leslie Griffin, one of the co-chairs for the Family Medicine Forum Committee. I am very pleased to welcome you here for FMF 2023 in beautiful downtown Montreal. I see some familiar faces from last year from Toronto, so welcome back, and several new faces, so welcome. I hope you guys have a great 4 days. We've been planning a busy 4 days full of academic programming for the FMFC. I hope you guys find some interesting and invigorating talks to go to. Also, don't forget, our exhibit hall will be starting today, starting at our first break, and will be open for today, tomorrow, and Friday. We'll be closed on Saturday, so make sure you get in there before Saturday to meet up with some of our exhibitors. In addition, don't miss out on all of these networking and social activities that are planned. So with that, I would like to jump to our conflict of interest slides, which were up a couple seconds ago. Let's see if they can get them back up again. We're not. They always leave the COI disclosures to me because I'm kind of the CPD guy, so I can probably do it by memory, but we'll see if we can get them back up. Starting with our conflict of interest disclosure slides, which is the next slide. I'll get you guys to jump ahead. That's great. So all FMF Planning Committee members are required to submit completed COI documentation to the committee for review annually. In addition, at the beginning of each of our meetings, they are asked to verbally disclose any new COIs that the rest of us should be aware of before going into the planning stages. So we thank our committee members for their diligence in this area. In addition, all FML presenters and speakers at certified sessions and workshops are required to submit completed COI declarations as part of their abstract submission process. These COIs are reviewed by our committee in detail during the initial abstract reviews. Any issues that are brought up from the committee during that review are then looked at to see if a mitigation can be put in place. Mitigation can be any number of factors, including reminding presenters to stick to COPD guidelines, to restricting naming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we find there are COIs that exist that we cannot mitigate, we do not include those abstracts. And finally, our next slide. Financial support. So FMF and FMF 2023 has received financial support from both Scotiabank and MD Financial as presenting sponsors of the conference. And thank you to our sponsors for their generous support. And our final slide will be our mitigation policies. So the FMFC has a fairly robust mitigation network. I've alluded to some of those items that takes place during the initial abstract review. We also, if we have any concerns regarding selected submissions at the beginning of the process, we will flag those for a mandatory audit by one of our FMFC committee members. We also do rotating random audits throughout the 4 days of different sessions. If we identify any issues regarding COIs or certification validation issues, those are brought forward, and we do have a equally robust violation policy. And as much as I would love to give you details of that policy, I can tell from looking at that I enjoy the CPD stuff maybe more than you guys. So let's move on to the next site, and that is my pleasure to introduce my co-chair for the last 7 years, Dr. Stephen Howickson. Stephen?
Thank you. Leslie? Oh, good morning, everybody. Bonjour. Welcome to Montreal. It's good to be back. It's been 6 years. Thank you for doing all the CPD stuff that I dislike doing, Leslie. So I just have a few things before we jump into our keynotes. So this year, for our interpretation, there's an app. So on the screen up there, it's been showing the app is called Interprify. You could find that on the App Store, and you just need to put in FMF 2023 to get the simultaneous interpretation. Some of the sessions will be, not all of FMF is, but as many sessions as we could, we have done simultaneous interpretation for. There's also the app. Hopefully you've found the app, FMF 2023. On there you can see the schedule. There's a lot of information about the speakers. You could connect with other participants. Usually there's a bit of a live chat that goes on. We'll see what sort of random usernames come up with comments this year. Those are always fun. And then there are session evaluations on that app. It's really important to FMF that we do get your feedback around the sessions, because at the end of the day, like everything we do in medicine, it's continuous quality improvement. We want to know what sessions work for you. How can we do it better? So within the app, there is that evaluation where you can give feedback, say this was relevant, not relevant. How can we make it better? You also have the opportunity to find the committee members. So there's myself and Leslie, and I will introduce the rest of the committee briefly. And I think we will have a little badge. So if you have any feedback, we've got thick skin. Please let us know how we could make the conference better. If you have any suggestions, or just come by and say hi. Now, to get your credits for the sessions you attend, there are session scanners at the door on the way in. So hopefully on your way in today, you got scanned. If not, you might be able to get scanned on the way out. If not, down your registration, there is a session scanning desk where you can get your badge scanned for any sessions that you might have missed. And lastly, just appreciation for all the work that's gone into this. So we do have a multitude of staff at the CFPC that have put in a lot of time and hard work to make this event the day that it is, the 4 days. And so I'd like just to recognize Cheryl Seelig, Jennifer Campbell, and the countless other staff from the college that make this event so smooth. I know Leslie and myself seem like the co-chairs, but really it's the staff that make a lot of this happen. And we have a few days of meetings, and then we show up and a wonderful conference occurs. Now, there's also the committee members I'd like to acknowledge, and they're sitting at the front here. So if the committee members, the FMFC committee, can stand wherever you are in the room. Just a brief hand for all the work for the staff. So find us if you have any questions, comments, concerns. And without any further ado, I'll invite up our Deputy CEO, Dr. Nancy Fowler, to just introduce our speaker we're very fortunate to have.
Okay, the main event. Now it's my absolute honor to introduce Dr. Kanine Osei-Tutu for what is as our keynote speaker for what is the 8th annual Dr. Ian McWhinney Keynote Address. The late Dr. McWhinney is acknowledged as one of the founders of family medicine in Canada, credited with defining our discipline as a distinct field of medicine. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Osei-Tutu. In 2023, Dr. Osei-Tutu became the first recipient of the National Leadership Award from the Black Physicians of Canada. This award recognizes individuals for their excellence and exemplary national leadership in advancing the Black Physicians of Canada vision of uniting, supporting, amplifying, and empowering Black physicians, physicians in training, and the Black community in Canada. Dr. Osei-Tutu is also the inaugural Senior Associate Dean, Health Equity and Systems Transformation at the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary, and the current recipient of our own CFPC's Donald I. Rice Award for Leadership, Innovation, and Excellence in Family Medicine. A well-established provincial and national leader in change transformation, Dr. Osei-Tutu is the founder and president of the Black Physicians Association of Alberta, and a member of the College of Family Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta's Anti-Racism, Anti-Discrimination Action Advisory Committee, where he informs the development of inclusive policies, educational programs, and curricula. Dr. Osei-Tutu earned a degree in kinesiology from McMaster University, followed by a Master's of Science and a medical degree at Dalhousie University. He completed his family medicine residency at the University of Toronto. On a personal note, I want to thank Kanine for his mentorship of both myself and our organization as we strive to become an ally organization. Souhaitons la bienvenue au Dr. Osei-Tutu.
Ooh, it's bright up here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that warm introduction. And what Nancy didn't mention was that we both played varsity basketball at McMaster back in the day, but she was a bit ahead of me, but we share that bond as well. So real honor to be here this morning, and I'm excited to spend some time with you this morning as we talk about some things that are near and dear to my heart, things I've been working on, things that I hope you will find resonate with you as well. Today, in terms of what I hope we get to talk about, is to explore the critical importance of social justice in medicine and contemplate the role that we play or don't play as physicians when we think of social justice issues and activities. I'm excited to also present to you a new conceptual model that I've been working on, which is a bit of a modification of the current CanMEDS framework, to think about if this is a potential way to start to look at some of the ways we see the field of medicine, the way we look at our clinics, our patients, our practices, and to sort of think of this, the model I present, as a bit of a metaphor for other aspects that you can apply in different areas of your practice. So in terms of disclosures, so I do serve as an EDI, an anti-racist strategic advisor to the CEO of the Royal College. I'm on the steering committee of the CanMEDS project, and I co-chair the CanMEDS Anti-Racism Expert Working Group, receive honorarium for that. But today the views I'm presenting are my own. So this is my family, and they're the reasons why I love to get up and fly from Calgary and come to visit you today. And my family are originally from Ghana, West Africa. And we want to acknowledge that as people of African descent, we recognize the historical colonialism and the ongoing colonialism that has led to the present day situation where land acknowledgements are offered in place of land. And as people of African descent, many of us have come here by choice, while many are here as a result of historical force. And so we acknowledge the complexities where we were promised land that was never given by those whose it was never to give. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us. We express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and we pledge to honor our dignity and the divinity that ultimately connects us all. So, in this talk, I always like to introduce ideas and get us to think about things that we may not have thought about before, and discuss some topics that maybe you've thought about but perhaps not have engaged in. And some aspects of my talk may be triggering. I don't know what those aspects may be for you, so I apologize if anything does land as triggering. In those moments of discomfort, though, that's where the greatest growth happens. And so I hope as we journey together, you keep that spirit in mind and we engage and walk together with an open mind and an open heart. So, I was born in Treaty 1, which is the birthplace of the Métis Nation. And that's where my journey began. Winnipeg, actually is Western Cree for muddy water. We then relocated to Terrace, BC, and that sweater is not available anymore. You can't buy that. It's not for sale. Was that the 80s or so? Still looking good. And Terrace is a really interesting place where a great mix of compassion, a very diverse community, lots of interesting people from many different places. But also a challenging place to grow up in a number of ways. And I played sports, as I mentioned, played basketball. My family raised us to be world citizens, think globally, have big dreams. And when I was in grade 7, I saw this movie. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this movie, Cry Freedom, by Stephen Biko. This is a biography about a Black conscious movement leader and an anti-apartheid activist, Stephen Biko, who died in custody because of his advocacy work. And he was befriended by a man named Donald Woods, who was a white South African and a personal friend of Biko. And Donald Woods was forced into exile for attempting to expose the truth around Stephen Biko's death. And when I was in grade 7, I went to this movie with my best friend at the time. His name was Mike. And we had different views coming out of the movie and out of that experience. And the movie provided me with some of the earliest experiences that I had of learning that one could lose one's life for standing up for what one believes in. It provided me with some early memories of realizing that some causes are in fact worth dying for. But it was also a defining moment for me personally, and a painful moment when I came to realize that my then best friend had a very different view of the story. And I remember this gut-wrenching feeling that came over me when I realized that my friend Mike did not see us as equal human beings. And I remember the crushing blow of my very humanity being rejected. Mike is white, I am Black. It was that simple, yet it was that complicated. And the movie served to reveal a difference that we had not previously identified as a factor, and our friendship never recovered. Taking a stand for something that one believes in can come with great personal risk, but standing for justice is always the right thing to do. And so a question I'm curious to know from all of us here, from you here, is why are you here this morning? We're a few minutes into this journey together, and I don't know where we'll be collectively at the end of my address. I don't know what shifts will occur, but I do know that some of you will leave here feeling differently if you allow yourselves to think differently and reflect deeply. But why are you here? Do you ever stop to think about that? There's a lot of pain in the world right now. There's also a lot of promise and possibility. And so why are you here? Why did you choose medicine? Why this profession? Is it living up to your ideals? And perhaps more importantly, are you living up to its ideals? How invested are you? Not how many investments have you made, but how invested are you in your craft? Are you still passionate, or are you simply going through the motions? And how are we doing? If things are going well and could be going better, how would we do that? And if things aren't going so well, what could be doing better and how could we do that? And how are we doing with health equity in Canada? We know that First Nations patients wait longer in emergency departments, get triaged with lower priority scores when they come to our emergency departments to seek care. We know about Brian Sinclair, who was ignored to death. 36 hours, ignored in the waiting room, died of a treatable infection. We know about Joyce Echaquan, who was killed by racism in this very province. What about all the other Indigenous women that we don't know about? Stats Canada lets us know that the infant mortality rate for Indigenous people is twice as high in areas with large populations of First Nations people, and 4 times higher in places where Inuit people live. So how are we doing? If things are going well, but could be going better, how could we do that? And if things aren't going so well and could be going better, how could we do that? When we look at other populations of individuals who are oppressed, we see that in the LGBTQ+ community, there are high rates of mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, and substance use. And evidence shows that those people with intersecting social identities carry a heavier burden of deleterious health outcomes, going to the fact that we need to see the whole person and look beyond just what is presenting in front of us, and look past that and see what we're not seeing. And what's interesting when we look at the LGBT+ community is that outcomes are even worse if you are a Two-Spirit Indigenous person, a Black person, or an Indigenous person. And why is that? Let's look at some other communities. We look at health inequities and injustices for Black patients. You may be surprised to know, or maybe you're not surprised to know, that Black patients wait longer in the emergency department, receive lower emergency triage scores, are less likely to receive blood tests, and are more likely to experience death in hospital after their emergency department visit. We look at restraint use, if anybody here does psychiatry or works in that field at all. This was a large study out of the US, which shows that race was a significant predictor of physical and chemical restraint use. If patients are presenting and they don't have psychiatric illnesses and are just presenting at the emergency department for general conditions, restraint use for Black and African American individuals was higher compared to white individuals. And what about children? This was astonishing to me. Which child in this photo, if they showed up to an emergency department, would you think would be more likely to be put in restraints, and why? And if you have an answer to that question and your answer is intuitive, then you should ask yourself, why do you have that intuition? What would lead you to that conclusion? Which of these children is more likely to be restrained? This study from the United States showed that children aged 0 to 16 years were more likely to be physically restrained than white children. It's astonishing. When we look at infant mortality rate, black babies are more likely to die than white babies. This is the United States. And when you control for income, the richest black babies, in other words, babies born to wealthy black mothers, die at a higher rate than the poorest white babies. In other words, babies born to the poorest white mothers. Astonishing, right? Now, this is where it gets very interesting and maybe perhaps controversial. This study showed that for black babies, the race of their doctor could be life or death, and that in fact, black newborns were significantly more likely to survive if they had a black doctor. Very interesting. Now, when black infants received care from a black doctor, the disparity was cut by 58%, whether the doctor was providing care before, during, or after childbirth. The same was not true in reverse. So a doctor's race had little to no impact on the health of a white infant. When we look at the UK, we see that black women are 4 times more likely than white women to die in pregnancy, and women from Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds are twice more likely to die during childhood. And this is an interesting study from JAMA, which showed that in these counties where there were black residents and there were more black physicians, whether or not those physicians actually saw, whether or not those patients actually saw those physicians, they had lower mortality rates from all causes. Astonishing. Now we can look into the studies and the data and try to critique how they did their studies, et cetera, but we should be asking ourselves what is going on here. My family and I traveled to Ghana, West Africa this summer, and we went on an excursion, and we spent we spent a couple days at this nice resort by the Akosombo Dam, and it's the rainy season, and we had a day where it would just rain for hours and hours and hours, so we could do nothing else but stay inside and watch movies. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with this movie. I was watching wrestling at the time, and my wife was like, change the channel, it's horrible. So then this movie came on and I watched it, which was even worse. This movie is this foul-mouthed teddy bear who marries this very lovely woman, and they want to have a child. And so this bear goes to court because they're denied the ability to adopt a child. So he goes to court, and he's advocating that advocating for his right to be human so that they can adopt a child. And so it's this very interesting, this battle between sort of property and humanity. This is another movie I watched during that rainstorm binge, Avatar, and we know that in this movie the Na'vi people talk about this concept of I see you, and they'll say this in these times of tremendous connection, often at end of life, that very, very deep and personal connection. I took my daughter, like every good father does, to see this movie, which was awesome. I loved it. It was I would see it again. And this is a great movie. You haven't seen it. There's many layers to it. And one of the layers that sort of comes out is this notion of privilege. And if you haven't seen the movie, you'll know that Barbie had a choice as to whether she enters the human world or whether she leaves the Barbie world or enters into the human world. And she decides to cross over. She had that choice. And what's interesting, at the end of the movie, did anybody, first of all, show of hands, anybody see the movie? Wow, okay, good. So at the end of the movie, what was the very first thing she did when she crossed over to the human world? She saw her gynecologist, right? She had that privilege. She recognized the privilege of health. There was something very, very important to her to have that experience. Maybe perhaps it was confirmation of her humanity, her womanhood, very first thing she does, she goes and she sees her gynecologist. Now, we contrast that with an Archer Westcott, who you may not have heard of, but she was an enslaved woman who was cared for by Marion Sims, who's known as the father of modern gynecology. And Sims subjected her to countless vaginal procedures where he created vaginal vesicle fistulas without anesthesia, perfected his craft, and it wasn't until he had done that multiple times that he went on and performed this procedure on white women. And so whereas Barbie, in the Barbie world, is able to have her dignity and humanity as the first thing she goes to do when she becomes human, we haven't afforded that same dignity to women in this world. And so we should think about that. We should think about the Queen's ban in 1918 on black medical students. We should think about the epistemic racism that existed in McGill and Dalhousie and U of T. This man was told in 1964 that black boys have no business in medicine. And my father went on to become a university-trained urologist, practiced urology for 40 years in BC, took care of multiple populations, people from all different backgrounds, pioneered urological services in northern BC, but was told that he didn't belong in medicine. I presented before about this case of a white surgeon who hung a noose on the door of an operating room targeting a black surgical assistant. That surgeon never had an opportunity to have his case properly heard until 5 years afterwards, but was never actually interviewed or had a opportunity to testify. The surgeon in the end got 4 months for his offense, claiming that this wasn't a noose but actually a lasso, and that he didn't know what it was, despite the fact that where he grew up in South Africa, there was a museum dedicated to nooses not too far from where he lived. This woman, a white MLA, had a noose hung outside of her home, and she got a press conference and media attention. It was quite a bit of a different reaction. We know that black physicians in Ontario continue to face racism. And we know that nurses in the profession, in fact, 88% of black nurses face racism in their work. And so the question is how are we doing? And I'm presenting this data just as an example, and we could take other groups and other populations and go through some of the similar exercise, but I want to give you some of this information because you may not get it from another source. So A+, B-, room for improvement. And the question is, what is the role of social justice in medicine? Is there a role for social justice in medicine? I believe that there is, and I'm hoping to convince you as well. Social justice broadly is this notion that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. Social justice in medicine is very much about a rights-based approach, so that every patient, regardless of the diverse community from which they come and belong, has the same right to health, the same right to well-being, the same opportunities, the same privilege that Barbie, for example, had. And so we should think about how we're doing in that space and perhaps how we could do better. We've done some work in this area. There's some papers that are published that you can read about, and I won't go into them here, but these are some places to start if you want to begin to read more about applications of social justice, anti-racism medicine, et cetera. And so we exist at a point where there are many crises going on, and there are also many opportunities. And really it depends on how we look at the situation. I see tremendous opportunity for us as a community moving forward. Imagine if we seized the opportunity to look at things differently. Imagine if we had the courage to pause and reflect on where we're at and how we're doing. Imagine if we had the audacity to believe that we could drive transformational change in medical education and systems. Imagine if we had the humility to say that we are going to try our best, we'll get some things wrong, and we'll get some things right, and that's okay, so long as we authentically lean into the task at hand. Last year I gave a talk called Be the Change, the Essential Transformation of Becoming Anti-Racist Leaders at the CFPC Leadership Forum. And in that talk, I went through some of the foundational knowledge around some of the anti-racist approaches, anti-oppression approaches. We kind of dealt with the lower two layers of this slide. But it's really that middle space of shared humanity and inclusive compassion that we need more of in order to evolve in this process. And this, I think this framework is applicable to many different approaches in anti-racism and anti-oppression and social justice more broadly. And one of the things we really need to think about is our ability to intervene. And in this space, we get into concepts such as critical consciousness, which is kind of an enabler of the transformation. And then, how do we do this in terms of actions that we can actually take? And this is where I like to use the idea of an upstander as an example. Just to unpack it a bit, critical consciousness is this concept popularized by Paulo Freire, who talks about the ability to intervene in reality in order to change it. And isn't that what we're talking about when we're talking about social justice? He also describes this as consciousness raising, taking action against oppressive elements in one's life that are illuminated by that understanding. And then the notion of upstander intervention is that an upstander is someone who witnesses an event or a behavior that could lead to something high risk or harmful, and then makes a choice to intervene and make things better. And so how often are you acting as an upstander in your practice, in your community, in the system? Are you a physician and therefore you're somehow they didn't want me to say that. Are you somehow excused from having a responsibility to intervene? Do you feel that this physicianhood makes us somehow able to see something, but it's not our responsibility to actually intervene because we're concerned about making someone else feel bad, or perhaps it's not our place, or some other reason that we tell ourselves because of the privilege that we've all wrapped ourselves in, that we've cloaked ourselves in as physicians. And so when we're contemplating social justice and what that means to stand up, to take a stand, to intervene, to get involved, to get off the sidelines, this is the truth. So I'm going to switch gears a bit here and talk about our current state of affairs in terms of medical education and the physician competency framework in which we have been trained. Now, CanMeds is new, I think, to certainly myself. It kind of came out a bit after I was done. But the idea of this framework is that this is supposed to represent you and I. This is meant to speak to who we are as physicians, that which defines us, that which defines what we do and the standards by which we do it. And by fulfilling all these roles, the outcome is to be optimal patient care. And so this should impact our clinics, our offices, our communities, and our health systems in a positive way. And the reframing of this framework, and the reason why it's relevant to present today, is that this is now meant to not just be confined to residency education or medical training, but this is meant to be a continuum and impact our continuing professional development, such that we should be continually working on developing the roles that are described here and looking at things differently as well. So this is the present. We've got the Royal College version, which centers medical expert. And we have our family medicine version, which also centers medical expert, but then also brings in, I think, a broader perspective with community and that physician-patient relationship. But if we look at our healthcare system and the way things have been applied, I think we can agree that perhaps this may not be getting us to where we want to be, and perhaps there's ways to look at it differently. And so the question is, what could the future look like? And so I've been thinking about a few different ideas, and I want to just kind of share with you this model. I'm going to walk through it with you and get your feedback. Now, you may not like the colors. My wife was like, no, you should just, I like purple. I think it's a nice color. It makes me feel warm. And she wanted just go with blue and keep it sort of, I think she's watching, so, but anyway. I went with the purple version, David, so I hope you're okay with that. So this is a bit of what I've been thinking about, and it requires kind of an application of things through a bit of a different lens. And as we walk through this model together, please consider how you might apply it at the individual level, the interpersonal level, at your clinic, or at your hospital, and then more broadly. So this model places shared humanity and inclusive compassion at the heart of transformative healthcare. So the core of the model involves shared humanity and inclusive compassion through an intersectional lens. Why that's important. So shared humanity, as we've been talking about, recognizes this profound interconnectedness that we were all equal and we all have value. And isn't that what we believe and has led us into medicine? Inclusive compassion underscores the importance of comprehending and addressing the diverse needs of patients, considering their social identities, cultural contexts, lived experiences, and extending compassion to all people without discrimination. This model wants to emphasize intersectionality, which is why there's the interlocking circles, acknowledging that there are overlapping and interconnected forms of oppression that affect all people based on their identities. And as physicians, we need to pay attention to these intersectionalities so that we can provide the best patient care. This model centers shared humanity, and we are in that. The humanity of our colleagues, the humanity of our staff, the humanity of the allied professionals. In this space, physician and patient are to be seeing one another, to be recognizing one another, to be having an authentic exchange. The first layer of the model provides the foundational pillars. And this is where we can tackle systemic inequalities and biases. These are the foundational pillars of the model. And the model seeks to draw our attention to the approaches, the strategies, and the inclination we must assume to be better action the rights-based principle of social justice in medicine. So this model highlights the importance of cultural safety. This model highlights the importance of anti-racist approaches to meet the needs of culturally diverse populations. This model highlights the importance of an anti-oppression approach, which broadly recognizes power imbalances and recognizes all groups from all backgrounds and lifts everyone up. And then importantly, this model cradles social justice, holding up our shared humanity, holding us up in that space of inclusive compassion so that we can truly advance our profession and provide the best care for our patients. These pillars provide the ethical framework that I think should guide physicians in our interactions with one another and the care we provide to our patients. And by addressing the social determinants of health and advocating for equitable care, we as physicians can mitigate healthcare disparities and improve patient outcomes. Some people will ask why I talk about anti-racism. I'd much rather be talking about something else, but I think it's important to understand that it should be a foundational competency that we all have as physicians. And the stance and that inclination and the skills you gain in that space can provide a gateway to dismantling other forms of oppression and serves as an opportunity to achieve equity for all people, including Black, Indigenous, and racialized Canadians. And so the question isn't why anti-racism, it's why not? You know, what is the barrier to that? This is a paper we wrote which can give some thoughts into why, may open your eyes as to why this should be a foundational competency and how foundational it has actually been to our training, what we were taught and not taught. The second layer of the model is a very exciting place. I'm calling this the dynamic layer. And in this layer would exist cross-cutting themes and emerging concepts. Now, this model seeks to emphasize a few different things, but there are interchangeable components here. This model emphasizes patient experience over patient care, again, to center that notion of the patient's perspective, not our perspective in terms of the care we provide. We may all think we're providing great care, but I think some of the numbers I've shown you suggest that we're not. And perhaps we focused also on the patient experience and heard what patients actually think of the care they're receiving. That may help to reorientate our lens. Now, this model in this layer is highlighting some concepts such as structural competency, trauma-informed care, equity, but this model also allows for those to be interchangeable. So you could introduce planetary health, women's health, LGBTQ+, artificial intelligence. The core and the foundational pillars remain the same. In this dynamic layer, we can engage in some of these emerging concepts. This layer seeks to encourage innovation and continual refinement and meant to be adaptable to one's local or global context. And then finally, we have the transformed and action-oriented physician. So in this outer layer, you will notice a few things. This model has decentralized the medical expert, and we have a values-based framework which is centering shared humanity and inclusive compassion. Medical expert has been transformed to medical ways of knowing, acknowledging that there are many different forms of medical knowledge that we need and that it's a continual process. All the roles are now in balance, suggesting that one role is not superior to another, but that each forms an important part of our identity as physicians and our practice. And importantly, each role has been transformed from its static form to its active form. So we're no longer professionals, but we are in fact role modeling professionalism. We're no longer collaborators, but we are collaborating. We're no longer leaders, but we're leading. We're advocating, we're learning, because this is a continual, ongoing process. We don't ever arrive at the end of the journey, but we continue the journey, and we recognize that we're going to go through different places and spaces on our journey. And so when we compare a possible idea for the future, this is just a thought, it won't end up being this, but if any of these concepts get into a revised version of a current framework, might that be an improvement? Have we been centering the right things in our training, in our practices, in our interactions with our patients? Or can we go deeper and reconnect with what I think many of us came into medicine wanting to do? We have some progress with our family medicine revision of the model, but again, is there more that this model could incorporate to get us closer to where we want to be as family physicians? Or is it going to be something totally different? So the implications of this model, I think this model or a model like it could have transformative potential in medical education and health systems. It aligns core values with an action-oriented approach to address the social determinants of health and biases, integrating social justice principles into medical education, training, and practice. It lays a foundation for promoting health equity and improving patient outcomes. The model's implications, as I said, should extend beyond you and your individual patient, but think about the community, think about health systems, think about empowering physicians as effective leaders in creating inclusive and equitable healthcare environments, places and spaces where we challenge barriers, advocate for policy changes, and foster collaborations to drive societal impact and dismantle disparities. This model seeks to address the urgent need, and I emphasize urgent, for equitable healthcare. I think future directions of this model could involve implementation and evaluation of its framework's effectiveness, exploring interdisciplinary collaborations, because we're not alone as physicians, we're just part of the system. And ultimately, this model encourages us to envision physicians as agents of change, not passive observers, that are challenging the status quo, redefining excellence in healthcare to align with the principles of justice, patient-centered care, and societal impact. Now, at this point in time in the talk, you might be thinking, if you're a med ed person, how do I evaluate this? I know some people are thinking about that. I can think of a few that come to mind. And so this is just a practical example of how we might start to apply some of these concepts in practice. And I go back to this notion of upstander intervention. And in this example I provide, what I'm showing here is there's a spectrum, okay? And at different levels, whether you're a medical student, resident, or staff, these concepts can be applied in an actionable way. The very, very basic fundamental concept, I believe, in which we must all engage, is this ability to challenge and interrupt discrimination, practices that perpetuate racism or oppression in a clinical setting. Isn't this the thing that we struggle the most to do? If you see a patient or someone else make a disparaging comment to someone in your care, what is your response? Isn't that when we tend to retract? So as a basic competency, that should be a minimum expectation. As a resident or a fellow, perhaps now you've evolved, and now you're getting involved in an actual intervention or implementing a project or doing a research project. As a community or staff physician, perhaps you're now involved in teaching, facilitating these spaces. How do we evaluate it? There's evaluation experts in this room, but there are ways in which we can evaluate these competencies quite effectively. And this is just an example. I have others which I won't talk about today. So ultimately what I'm talking about today is the art of the possible. You know, there is so much that we can do as a collective should we choose. Should we decide to get off the sidelines, or should we decide to get more involved if we're already involved? Time is going on, and are you in your practice, in your personal life, truly engaged and feel like you're making the difference you may feel that you were called to make? And so what are you going to do about it? What is your responsibility? What is your role? Are you a passive bystander, or are you an active upstander? If you've been going through the motions, are you resigned to continue with the same? Or are you about to get fired up and ready to go? What are you going to use your privilege for? And what legacy do you want to leave through your practice and on the world? Last year when I spoke, I gave a call to action to the Leadership Forum, and these were the calls that I gave at that time, and a colleague advised me to reintroduce the calls to see how folks have been doing. And these were some very practical examples of things I felt leaders could be doing if they wanted to start to shift things in their organizations or their clinics in a very, very tangible way, because these are things that are in your control. And so if you were at that forum when these calls were issued, you may reflect now and ask yourself how you were doing. Did you make any progress? Is there more work to do? This year's call is different. This year's call is a call to reflection and action. And the question is, do you have more light to shine? Do you have more to give to these issues that we've described, or the other issues that resonated close to your heart in the field of social justice in which you could engage? I had a conversation with a colleague of mine. We were on call last week, and I said, Mariette, I'm giving this talk next week. And she's like, what's it on? And I told her about it, and I kind of went through the framework, and she said, oh, that's really cool. And I said, if I was to ask the audience how much they could give towards a social justice initiative, and recognizing how tired we are, and we've gone through COVID, and there's many, many challenges in the world, what would be a reasonable ask of ourselves? And so she and I sort of said, 2 to 5%, right? Do you in this room have 2 to 5% of yourself that you could give to a social justice cause? 5% of your time in a day is an hour. That might be much. But let's just say in a week, could you give half an hour? Could you read a book? Could you review a policy? Could you take 5% of your office space in your clinic and put up a sign that says, this clinic is an anti-oppressive clinic? Could you give 5% of your advertisement space? If you can give 2 to 5% to some of these issues that we've talked about this morning, then the next question is, will you? If you have it to give, will you give it? And if you're not going to give it, why aren't you going to give it? To my first question this morning, why are you here? So I still believe that together we can create more compassionate spaces. I still believe that we can put our biases aside and take time to see each other for a shared humanity. I believe that you, all of you, want to leave more of a positive impact in the world than you're currently making, and that you have more to give. So why don't we say that it started here? Why don't we say that it started now? Why don't we decide to imagine that if this was the moment, we decided to get up and stand up and fight for something greater than ourselves? I still believe that a rising tide raises all boats. I still believe that we are stronger together. And I still believe that together, if we let our light shine, we can ignite the change. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have to make this plug. So thank you very much. That was an amazing ovation. If you want to engage in more of this conversation and keep it going, there is a workshop going on after this talk, happening in the room that was just shown. And love to see you. Love to see.
I'm not.
Love to see you all there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kanine. Merci, Dr. Osei-Tutu, pour cette présentation inspirante. And hopefully not only thought-provoking, but action-provoking as well. Now I turn to the more routine. I do have a few housekeeping reminders before we get into our first day of FMF. So we'll just shift gears here. We have 2 lunchtime networking sessions open to everyone at 12:45 today. There's the Knowledge Cafe in room 512 and the section of researchers networking lunch in room 516. So please pick up your lunch in the exhibit hall. Oh, I'm back. Okay, there you go. So hopefully you caught those rooms. Pick up your lunch and pop by. Check out those sessions. or you can take a break and explore the posters and the exhibit hall on level 2. Later this afternoon at 2 p.m., there's an important session. Don't want you to miss it. 1 year in, it's a look at the college's Declaration of Commitment to Cultural Safety and Humility in room 516. Hopefully we'll see you there. Reminder to check the FMF 2023 app for all sessions, events, and room numbers. J'aimerais maintenant reconnaître les membres de notre conseil d'administration pour tout le travail et le développement envers la médecine de famille. Je demande aux membres du conseil de se lever pour que l'ensemble puisse le reconnaître. Excuse me, I'd like to now take a moment to recognize the CFBC Board of Directors for their tireless work and dedication to the profession of family medicine. Board members, please stand and be acknowledged. Big hand. And these folks would like to meet you, so we'd like to invite you to come to the entrance of the room for an opportunity to meet with the members of the CFPC board and the FMF committee before you move on to your next session. Merci et profitez bien de votre première journée de FMF à Montréal. Thank you.